Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, in her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, damaging nature by not understanding how much we depend on.
For years, Charles Spencer appeared determined to remain outside the bitter conflict surrounding Meghan Markle and the royal family. But behind that carefully maintained silence, one question reportedly became impossible to escape. Had Meghan entered the same royal storm that once consumed his sister? Or was something far more complicated unfolding? The Spencer name carried a weight few families could understand. It was tied to aristocratic privilege, royal history, and the memory of a woman whose private suffering unfolded before the entire world. Princess Diana had entered the monarchy with hope, only to discover that palace walls could protect an institution far more effectively than they protected the people living inside it. Charles Spencer had witnessed the consequences. He had seen how public admiration could exist beside private isolation, and how one person could absorb the blame while the machinery around them remained untouched. That history made his silence over Meghan impossible to ignore. Charles was not simply Diana's younger brother. Over time, he had become one of the most powerful guardians of her memory. Every word he spoke about the royal family carried echoes of the past. Every comparison risked reopening wounds that had never fully healed. That was why he reportedly avoided offering a direct judgment on Meghan. To defend her too strongly could appear to confirm Harry's darkest fears. To criticize her could be seen as betraying a woman who claimed to have suffered inside the same institution that had wounded Diana. But the questions kept coming. Journalists wanted to know whether he recognized the same loneliness. Royal commentators asked whether history was repeating itself. Members of the public wondered why Diana's own brother had not stepped forward to support Harry and Meghan. His refusal to answer began creating its own suspicion. Harry's marriage had placed Meghan uncomfortably close to the Spencer legacy. She was not Diana, and she had never occupied Diana's unique position within the monarchy. Yet Harry's fear connected the two women in his mind. Charles may have understood that fear better than almost anyone. He knew Harry had once watched helplessly as pressure surrounded his mother. He could understand why Harry might have sworn never to let the same thing happen to his wife. Yet Charles also understood the differences. Meghan had spoken publicly, left royal life, moved overseas, and helped transform private family disputes into an international battle. Diana had resisted the palace too, but her path, obligations, and emotional ties were not identical. Charles had allegedly watched those differences grow more important with every interview and accusation. His silence, then, was not emptiness. It was judgment delayed. He was observing, weighing, remembering, and when he finally spoke, his words would not provide the simple defense Harry may have expected. The question was no longer whether Charles Spencer would break his silence. It was which side would feel most betrayed when he did. And as the pressure around Charles Spencer intensified, one private conversation reportedly forced him to confront the comparison. The palace feared most the comparison between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana. Prince Harry had spent years drawing an emotional line between Meghan and Diana, presenting both women as outsiders pursued by the same unforgiving forces. But to Charles Spencer, that comparison carried a private history Harry could not fully control, and a truth that might completely change how Meghan's story was understood. For Harry, Meghan's difficulties inside royal life never existed on their own. Every hostile headline, every leaked conversation, and every disagreement behind palace doors seemed to carry an echo from his childhood. He had seen public pressure gather around Diana. He had watched criticism harden into cruelty. Now, whenever Meghan appeared isolated or attacked, the past seemed to return with terrifying force. That fear was more than a husband's concern. It was an old wound guiding new decisions. Long before Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties, He had already convinced himself that delay could become disaster. Protecting Meghan was therefore tied to something deeper, the desperate need to succeed where, as a child, he had been powerless. Charles Spencer would have understood that instinct better than almost anyone. He had witnessed Diana struggling against impossible expectations, private loneliness, and a media machine that rarely allowed her peace. He knew why Harry feared repetition, but understanding the fear did not necessarily mean accepting every comparison built upon it. Within the Spencer family, an uncomfortable question allegedly began to surface. Was Harry honoring Diana's memory? Or was he using her tragedy as protection against any criticism of Meghan? The distinction was dangerous. Diana's suffering deserved to be remembered. But if her story became a shield, then every challenge to Meghan could be dismissed as another act of persecution. That tension reportedly came into focus during a private exchange when Charles was asked whether Meghan possessed Diana's instinctive connection with ordinary people. He hesitated. A careless answer could wound Harry, strengthen Meghan's critics, and drag Diana's name into yet another battle she could no longer control. The differences were impossible to dismiss. Diana's bond with the monarchy had stretched through marriage, motherhood, succession, and years of public duty. Her sons were at the center of its future. Meghan's time as a working royal had been far shorter, and her response to pressure had taken a different path: departure, public testimony, and open confrontation. Charles allegedly began to suspect that Harry's trauma made him see repetition even where the circumstances had changed. Perhaps the real question was not whether Meghan resembled Diana, but why Harry needed her experience to carry the same meaning. That possibility unsettled royal advisors. If Diana's own brother questioned Harry's central comparison, the emotional foundation of the Sussex argument could begin to crack. More troubling still, Charles did not appear ready to place every failure at the palace's feet. But the palace was not the only institution watching Charles Spencer carefully. Because inside the Sussex camp, his silence was beginning to look less like neutrality and more like a warning. Harry and Meghan had faced critics before, but Charles Spencer was different. His support could have transformed their struggle into a continuation of Diana's unfinished battle with the crown. Instead, his silence deepened, leaving the Sussexes to wonder whether the man closest to Diana's legacy had quietly rejected their version of events. Harry may have believed the Spencer family would understand without needing an explanation. To him, leaving Britain had not been an abandonment of duty. It had been an act of protection. A decision made before royal pressure could inflict damage that could never be undone. Diana's relatives knew what happened when warnings were ignored. Surely, he may have thought, they would recognize why he refused to take that risk with Meghan. And Charles Spencer's approval would have carried extraordinary power. He did not need to deliver a furious attack on the palace. One careful sentence acknowledging that Harry had acted to protect his wife could have transformed the Sussex departure from rebellion into survival. It could have connected Meghan's struggle directly to Diana's unfinished battle with the institution that had once controlled her life. Meghan allegedly understood that symbolic value as well. Her critics claimed she had misunderstood royal responsibility, but Diana's brother defending her could have shifted the argument. It would suggest that the problem was not simply Meghan's inability to adapt. Perhaps the system itself remained emotionally unforgiving. There was speculation that people around the Sussexes quietly tried to discover Charles's opinion without forcing him into a public confrontation. Yet no endorsement came, no carefully chosen statement, no unmistakable sign of support. For Harry, that absence may have felt brutally personal. Charles was not merely a potential ally. He represented a living connection to the mother Harry had lost. His approval could have offered emotional reassurance that protecting Meghan was also a way of honoring Diana. But Charles's restraint challenged that belief. Inside royal circles, advisors noticed. If Diana's own brother would not support the comparison openly, then perhaps the Sussex narrative had limits even within her family. Commentators began asking why the Spencers had not defended Meghan's claims of isolation and unfair treatment. The silence became louder with every question. Charles allegedly refused to reduce the conflict to a simple battle between a cruel palace and an innocent outsider. He saw institutional coldness, but also personal choices. He recognized trauma, ambition, loyalty, anger, and the damage created when private pain became public warfare. Privately, he may already have reached a conclusion about Meghan. Speaking it, however, could fracture his relationship with Harry beyond repair. Then, at a gathering away from official palace control, a respected royal expert reportedly asked him directly what he truly believed. Charles understood that remaining silent would no longer protect anyone. Others were already interpreting his restraint and speaking in his name. That was when Charles Spencer reportedly made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He would answer the question. But he would do it in a way neither the palace nor Harry could easily use. The conversation was never meant to become public. There were no cameras, no prepared statement, and no palace officials controlling the language. Yet when Charles Spencer was asked what he truly believed about Meghan, the room reportedly changed. His first words sounded sympathetic, but the pause that followed suggested something devastating was coming. It began as an informal exchange among trusted associates, people who understood royal history and the damage hidden beneath polished tradition. No one spoke carelessly. Meghan's name carried too many shadows with it: Diana's suffering, Harry's anger, the monarchy's silence, and the media pressure that had turned a family conflict into a global spectacle. Charles reportedly began with compassion. Entering the royal family, he acknowledged, could be emotionally brutal. Its rules were rarely explained, yet every mistake was remembered. Its hierarchies could be invisible until someone crossed them. A woman arriving from outside might believe effort, warmth, and public success would be enough, only to discover that the institution valued obedience, continuity, and survival above personal comfort. For a moment, those listening believed Spencer was preparing to defend Meghan completely. Then, his tone shifted. He reportedly separated what Meghan may have suffered from what she later chose to do with that suffering. Pain could be real, he suggested, without making every accusation beyond question. Mistreatment could explain anger without proving that every public response was wise. The palace might have failed her, but that did not mean responsibility ended at its gates. That was when the royal expert pressed him. Did he believe Meghan had been treated the way Diana was treated? Charles paused. The silence forced everyone present to confront the danger buried inside the question. Diana had been vulnerable, but she had also been strategic. She was wounded, yet capable of defiance. She challenged the monarchy from within while remaining bound to it through her sons, her duty, and her place in the future of the crown. Meghan's path was different. She had sought freedom from the institution, left its working structure, and then challenged its authority from outside. Her pain may have been genuine, but her choices belonged to another story. Charles reportedly believed Harry had fused those stories together, because separating them would force him to face something far more painful. That his fear for Meghan was tangled with grief he had never escaped. Someone warned him that even making a distinction between the two women would be called an attack. Meghan's critics would weaponize it. Her supporters would condemn it. Harry might hear betrayal where Charles intended honesty. But Spencer refused to soften his view merely because the truth was emotionally inconvenient. He leaned into the silence and began the sentence that would soon stun royal experts. Then, Charles Spencer delivered the comment no one in the room expected: one sentence that appeared to defend Meghan, challenge Harry, and expose the hidden difference between pain and destiny. Charles Spencer's answer was neither the endorsement Harry wanted nor the condemnation Meghan's critics expected. Instead, he reportedly said, Meghan may have experienced some of Diana's pain, but that does not make her Diana. The distinction was simple, yet its consequences threatened to tear apart the Sussexes' most powerful emotional argument. The words landed with force because they allowed two uncomfortable truths to exist at once. Meghan could have felt isolated, judged, and emotionally overwhelmed inside royal life. The palace could have failed to understand her, protected tradition too aggressively, and placed institutional survival above human suffering. But none of that automatically made Meghan's experience identical to Diana's. Charles had drawn a line that neither side wanted to acknowledge. Shared pain did not mean shared character. Similar headlines did not create the same history. Diana had been tied to the monarchy through marriage, motherhood, succession, and years of public expectation. She remained at the center of its future even while fighting against the forces controlling her. Meghan and Harry, however, were eventually able to step away, relocate, and begin building a life beyond palace authority. That difference mattered. Spencer was not suggesting Meghan invented every difficulty, nor was he excusing the monarchy's rigid traditions or the emotional damage they could cause. His warning was more complicated. Suffering might explain a person's choices, but it could not make those choices immune from examination. The deeper challenge was aimed at Harry. His fear for Meghan may have been sincere. His memories of Diana may have made every hostile story feel like the beginning of another tragedy. Yet sincerity alone could not prove that history was repeating itself in exactly the same way. Harry had treated the comparison as emotional certainty. Charles had now presented it as something that still needed to be questioned. Almost immediately, both sides could have pulled the sentence apart. Meghan's critics would seize on the words, "That does not make her Diana," while ignoring the acknowledgement that she may have experienced genuine pain. Her supporters would emphasize that pain while dismissing the distinction Charles had carefully created. Royal experts reportedly debated whether the comment was compassionate, critical, or a warning against turning Diana into a political symbol. Palace advisors may have privately welcomed it because it weakened the Sussexes' most powerful argument. Yet the monarchy could not celebrate openly without appearing to use Diana's brother against her son. For Harry, the remark may have felt like something deeper than criticism. Diana's own brother had challenged the story Harry used to explain his marriage, his departure, and his anger. Meghan, meanwhile, may have understood the media danger immediately. The comparison that once strengthened her public defense could now invite harsher scrutiny. And Charles had not finished. His words raised another explosive question: who had truly benefited from keeping Diana's shadow over Meghan? Yet the most damaging question was still unanswered. If Meghan was not Diana, why had Harry built so much of their public defense around the belief that she was facing the same fate? For Harry, the comment struck far deeper than royal politics. It challenged the emotional logic behind his marriage, his departure from Britain, and his war with the palace. If Charles Spencer was right, Harry had not simply protected Meghan from history, he may have allowed his grief to decide what history meant. Diana's death had shaped the way Harry understood danger. Media intrusion was never just publicity. Palace silence was never simply protocol. Emotional distance was never harmless. Each carried the shadow of abandonment, and every new conflict threatened to reopen the moment when he had been too young and powerless to save his mother. Protecting Meghan therefore became inseparable from protecting Diana in his own mind. When criticism gathered around his wife, Harry did not see an ordinary royal dispute. He saw the beginning of a familiar collapse. To wait felt reckless. To compromise felt dangerous. Escape became proof of love. Charles Spencer's distinction threatened that belief. If Meghan's experiences were real, but not identical to Diana's, Harry would have to separate his wife's pain from the memories he had carried into the marriage. That was no small demand. Any challenge to the comparison may have felt like an accusation that he had misunderstood his own mother, or worse, used her tragedy to justify choices that now carried consequences of their own. The departure from royal life, the interviews, the revelations, and the accusations against family members had all been shaped by the belief that urgent action was necessary. But if history had not been repeating itself exactly, those decisions could no longer be judged only as rescue. They would also have to be examined as choices. Spencer had not denied Harry's fear. He had questioned whether fear had become a trustworthy guide. Inside palace circles, some reportedly believed Harry had turned unresolved grief into a permanent conflict with the family. Every disagreement became betrayal. Every silence became evidence. Yet the monarchy was not innocent. Its secrecy, emotional restraint, and instinct to protect itself may have confirmed the very suspicions Harry already carried. That was the tragedy. The palace underestimated the depth of his wound, while Harry treated every resistance as proof that catastrophe was approaching. Meghan was caught in the center. She had grievances of her own, but she had also become a symbol in Harry's unfinished battle over Diana. Charles may have feared that her identity had become trapped inside a comparison no living woman could survive. And beneath it all was another approaching conflict. Who possessed the right to define Diana's legacy? Her son? Her brother? Or the institution that had once failed them both? While Harry wrestled with the personal meaning of Spencer's words, palace advisors focused on something colder, how the comment could reshape the monarchy's battle for public trust. Inside royal circles, Charles Spencer's comment was treated as both a gift and a warning. It weakened the most explosive comparison used by Harry and Meghan, yet it also confirmed that Meghan may have endured real pain behind palace doors. One careless response could turn Spencer's distinction into another royal disaster. Palace advisors reportedly examined every word with extreme caution. Charles Spencer was not an ordinary commentator. His connection to Diana gave his judgment an authority no official statement could easily match. By separating Meghan from Diana, he had weakened the emotional argument that the monarchy was repeating its darkest mistakes. After years of accusations, interviews, and public comparisons, that distinction offered the palace something it desperately needed: distance from the past. But it was a dangerous gift. Spencer had also acknowledged that Meghan may have suffered. That single concession raised an uncomfortable question. If another royal wife had felt isolated, misunderstood, and unprotected, then what had truly changed since Diana's era? Officials reportedly resisted the temptation to amplify his remarks. Any sign of celebration could make the monarchy appear eager to use Diana's brother against Diana's son. Silence seemed safer, but silence had failed before. A vague message about family privacy might calm the headlines, while friendly commentators could quietly emphasize the differences between Meghan and Diana without making the palace's involvement visible. Every option carried risk. William stood at the center of that tension. He may have agreed privately that Meghan was not his mother, yet the idea of Diana being used as a weapon against Harry could still feel deeply offensive. Defending the institution without allowing his mother's memory to become political ammunition required a balance almost impossible to maintain. For King Charles, the danger was equally personal. Any renewed debate about Diana's suffering threatened to reopen questions about their marriage and the monarchy's treatment of her. Camilla's position was even more exposed. The moment Diana's pain returned to public discussion, old anger could follow, dragging decades of royal history back into the present. Meghan's supporters accused the palace of using Spencer's distinction to escape responsibility. Traditionalists claimed he had finally exposed the emotional manipulation behind the Sussex narrative. Yet neither side captured the full meaning of what he had said. Charles Spencer had offered compassion without surrendering judgment. Now his words were being torn apart and reshaped into opposing headlines. That reportedly frustrated him. he began to see that one carefully balanced sentence could never settle the conflict. Meghan's story had become a battlefield for every unresolved grievance surrounding Diana, Harry, Charles, Camilla, and the Crown itself. And when Charles Spencer saw how quickly his words were being weaponized, he reportedly offered one final warning, one that left no side untouched. Charles Spencer had tried to draw a careful line between compassion and comparison, but the royal conflict had already consumed his words. His final warning was devastating. Anyone who used Diana's pain without learning from it risked repeating the very cruelty they claimed to oppose, and that warning applied to everyone. Diana's memory, he reportedly believed, could not become a weapon for the Sussexes, the palace, the press, or the experts who continued turning her tragedy into profitable conflict. Her story was not valuable because it proved one modern side right. It mattered because it revealed what happened when fear, pride, and image management replaced empathy. For Harry, the warning was deeply personal. Honoring Diana did not require forcing Meghan to carry her identity. His wife's pain could be real without becoming a continuation of his mother's fate. Yet Harry's attempt to escape Diana's history may have tied his marriage to it even more tightly, until every disagreement felt like persecution and every compromise resembled surrender. Meghan faced an equally difficult challenge. Her experiences needed to stand on their own. If her story depended too heavily on Diana's shadow, then her choices, motives, and personality risked disappearing beneath a comparison no one could fully control. The palace was not spared. Spencer's warning demanded that royal officials stop treating emotional suffering as a public relations crisis to be contained until the headlines faded. Ceremony could hide discomfort, but it could not erase damage. Silence might protect the crown for a moment while deepening the wound beneath it. The media faced its own reckoning. Genuine analysis had become difficult to separate from the endless recycling of Diana's pain, where every new royal dispute was dragged back into an old tragedy because tragedy kept audiences watching. That was why Spencer's comment changed the debate. It allowed two truths to exist together. Meghan may have been hurt, and she was still not Diana. Future interviews, accusations, memoirs, and reconciliation attempts would now be judged through that distinction. Harry faced a choice. He could continue interpreting every royal conflict through his mother's suffering, or build a future that did not depend on reopening the past. The monarchy faced the same decision: dismiss Meghan's pain, or confront the emotional failures hidden beneath discipline and tradition. No side could truly win. They remained connected by grief, resentment, history, and the desperate need to control Diana's legacy. Charles Spencer stood at the center as its reluctant guardian. His comment stunned experts, not because it revealed who Meghan was, but because it exposed what everyone needed her to be. Whether Harry heard that warning as compassion or added it to his list of betrayals remained painfully unresolved, because in the end, Charles Spencer's comment did more than separate Meghan from Diana. It revealed how deeply the living were still trapped inside a royal tragedy that had never truly ended.